This year, the Game Award for RPG goes to Claire Obscure Expedition 33.
Well, that's a bummer. But our story doesn't start here. Or here.
Take you home with me. Put you in my house.
It's the late 2000s and a Czech game studio is working on Mafia 2, a new addition to the gangster video game franchise under its new corporate owner. Vávra, the game's lead designer, is increasingly unhappy after 2K acquired Illusion Softworks. The new corporate structure, creative restrictions and ultimately the complete scrapping of his script for a potential Mafia 3 are the final straw. And so, in 2009, he quits.
Screw you guys, I'm going home.
Leaving the Mafia franchise, his baby, behind. 2 years later, Vávra, alongside producer Martin Klima, founds a brand new studio in Prague. They call it Warhorse Studios. Their mission is to create big, ambitious games with full creative freedom, without bowing to corporate whims. What they don't know is that a 6-year gauntlet of setbacks and chaos lays ahead. This is the story of Kingdom Come Deliverance. A medieval RPG had always been Vávra's dreams since visiting Czech castles with his grandparents. So the choice of setting for his new project was obvious. 1400s Bohemia. Everything else wasn't. After months of comparing 5 or 6 engines, they settled on CryEngine. Mostly because, as Dan put it, it had nice trees. The problem was that CryEngine was built for linear FPS games, not open-world RPGs. It was able to render stunning nature in unbelievable detail, but it had to be almost completely rebuilt from the ground up to cater to Dan's medieval open-world vision. Something developers of games like Crysis and Prey didn't have to break their heads over. And what a vision it was. Warhorse went into the field. The team made over 60 trips to real Czech locations they wanted to recreate. By the time they contacted historians, who were very skeptical,
Yeah, sure.
they already had a solid foundation of research, and work began. Their first prototype was tiny. A grassy field, a few houses, and one lonely NPC sitting there. But by 2012, 1 year later, they had a small town with NPCs walking around and dynamic music.
One of the first
who goes
game
there?
mechanics, branching dialogues.
Henry, son of the Skalitz blacksmith. I'm going to see my master, Sir Radzig Kobyla.
With this build, Warhorse flew around the world trying to convince publishers to fund the game.
No.
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 No magic?
You serious?
Over and over again. At this point, Warhorse was out of options. And so, desperate, they tried something different. They ordered a professional gaming survey. The results were shocking. Gamers wanted a realistic medieval RPG. For the first time, the risk didn't look insane anymore. It meant that if people want it, they might be willing to back it.
Hi, I'm the creative director of the game you just saw. I hope you liked it. And I'm here to tell you more about the game, about the people behind it, and most importantly, about the reason why we are here on Kickstarter.
Warhorse hired a US agency to release articles on the same day the Kickstarter went live. But on launch morning, with everything in place, Dan walked into the office and the lawyers told him that the campaign couldn't legally start.
Well, shit.
Gaming media worldwide was full of KCD, but the Kickstarter page was dead. Hours of torture passed as the team stared at the launch button, unable to press it. Every minute that passed meant money they would never get back. Finally, the issue was resolved, they hit the button and the money started pouring in. They reached their £200,000 goal in a single day. By the campaign's end, they were sitting on £1.1 million. The team was euphoric. But with success came a new problem. They were no longer making a small local game. They were making a mid-budget historical RPG. And they had to expand quickly. So quickly, in fact, that their future community manager, Sir Toby, who was coincidentally Dan's neighbor, was basically hired in the elevator of their building. Then reality hit. They had overpromised on Kickstarter. The stretch goals were impossible to fulfill. The not delivered dog companion, which was eventually added as DLC, haunted Dan's nightmares for years. Many quests had to be cut shorter than planned, including Mila Peshek's storyline. Some cuts hurt, others fundamentally changed the game. Originally, armies were supposed to break through enemy lines before clashing into the center in large-scale battles. In the final game, battles became smaller group fights. But riding through the beautifully recreated countryside,
Absolute cinema.
the multi-layered clothing system Dan refused to cut almost destroyed performance. Later he said, "If I had known how much trouble it would cause, I would have cut it immediately." Because the team was small, responsibility was fluid. Unlike big AAA studios, where developers work on tiny parts without seeing the whole, Warhorse developers could influence decisions across the project. Many great ideas survived this way. The final game featured over 4 hours of cutscenes and thousands of combat animations. The combat system itself wasn't fully defined at the start, rather the idea developed as the work on the project progressed. Warhorse consulted multiple medieval combat groups. There was just one problem. No one actually agreed how medieval combat worked. You see, real historical sources from the region didn't exist. Central Europe switched to firearms early, so detailed longsword manuals were scarce. So they created a system that balanced all the information they could gather. In the end, the combat system turned out to be so overwhelming that it was streamlined for the sequel. Meanwhile, the search for Henry, the game's protagonist, brought even more chaos. At the end, they found Tom. The other Tom, that is, who left after getting a TV role, so they cast Tom McKay as their second choice, who went on to become the Henry we all know and love. Dan, neither a trained director nor a native English speaker, insisted on directing the cutscenes himself. He also wanted voices recorded live during motion capture and not in a studio afterwards. This gave KCD its natural grounded feel. For the soundtrack, Dan discovered composer Jan Walta, a former metal frontman, and immediately wanted him on board.
I want that guy.
Meanwhile, Walta had been researching the game on his own, hoping to join. He even asked a friend inside Warhorse, but was told, no chance. Dan already picked someone, so Walta didn't call. The next day, his phone rang. It was Dan. He had picked someone, Jan himself. As the project neared completion, the painful final stage began. What can we cut? Where can we cheat? Without prior experience, they had no data to guide them. Many flaws were obvious to the devs, but the publisher's deadline was brutal. Finally, the game shipped. Critics were cautious, but players fell in love. KCD sold 500,000 copies in its first week, an insane number for a new studio with a new IP. Kingdom Come Deliverance was not made for money, it was made from passion, and a team forged through conflict, arguments and relentless creative battles. And that passion swept the walls. Warhorse didn't stop after launch. They patched aggressively, and by version 1.5, the game finally felt complete. After KCD1, every creative and financial door swung open. In 2019, Warhorse went through the door. Work on the sequel began around the time. Developing a bigger game inside a much bigger studio came with a very different kind of pressure. With the first game, there were only two possible outcomes: surprise everyone or be forgotten. With Kingdom Come Deliverance II, that safety net was gone. After the success of the original, disappointment became a very real possibility, like a black flag appearing on the horizon. And simply matching the quality of KCD1 wouldn't have been enough. KCD2 had to surprise, it had to surpass. And that was no small task, because KCD1 had already set the bar extremely high. On the other hand, Warhorse now had something they didn't have before.
Money, 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 money!
Resources, a larger budget, a larger team, and more time. This time, they didn't have to ship the game hoping players wouldn't immediately break through the fragile scaffolding holding it together. The project was tested thoroughly, robust, stable, which was a fact reflected clearly in the pre-release reviews. Where KCD1 required full-throttle development right up to and even past release, just to stay afloat, the sequel allowed the team to focus on details, on refinement, on perfection. The first game was a leap into the unknown. Its success or failure would decide the very survival of the studio. But now, with KCD1 thriving in the world, Warhorse finally had data, direction, certainty, even though the scale of the sequel was far, far greater. Development was no longer a punk rock garage operation fueled by passion alone. It was a large, well-oiled machine, with all the complexity that comes with it. Creative decisions that once took a weekend could now take months. But the passion never left. Where Dan Vávra had pushed for realism and player freedom in KCD1, often being told it wouldn't resonate with players, he doubled down in the sequel. Quests now had even more outcomes. Some wouldn't happen at all, depending entirely on the player's previous actions. Many of the game's most unique systems exist because of Dan's perfectionism and his relentless make-it-possible mindset, now amplified by higher resources. Originally, the plan was modest, a map about a quarter larger than the first game, a few more quests, and finally the addition of crossbows, a feature cut from KCD1 due to budget constraints. But that wasn't enough. The team went through every single system in the original game asking one question: how can this be better? The focus shifted from adding more to improving what already worked. The goal became clear: create the ultimate version of Kingdom Come. Content had to matter, no filler. There was pressure from the publisher to include simpler side quests to save time.
Make it simple.
But that was never an option. The answer was always the same.
No.
Every piece of content had to be unique. The team also looked forward to the new console generation, expecting hardware that would easily handle their ambitious open worlds. What they got instead was a shock. The available memory was lower than expected, forcing Warhorse to spend months tuning down already finished systems. Months of work suddenly had to be undone. At one point, discussions even emerged about releasing the game only on PS5, but that wasn't the Warhorse way. Instead, they did what they always do. They got to work and optimized the game across platforms. Despite being bigger, longer, and arguably better than its predecessor, many things still didn't make the final cut. Even with more resources, some ideas were still too ambitious. A BART minigame, allowing players to create their own stories, was fully designed but ultimately scrapped due to technical limitations. Horse combat was prototyped as well, but proved incredibly difficult to make functional. Even the announcement of the game followed Warhorse's unconventional path.
Hello and welcome. My name's Tom McKay, and together with Luke Dale, we're here to present the first in-depth look at Kingdom Come Deliverance II.
Rather than spending enormous sums on major gaming events like the Game Awards, the studio organized its own reveal. They secured Kutná Hora, or
Kuttenberg,
gained permission to film inside St. Barbara's Cathedral, and produced a reveal trailer featuring real-life locations and historical soul. In the end, it worked. Kingdom Come Deliverance II sold over 1 million copies on day one, and over 4 million copies until this day. Numbers that would have felt impossible just a few years earlier. KCD2 is number 2 in every possible way. The map is twice as large. The game is twice as long. There's twice as much content. And the success, at least twice as strong. But none of that is the real reason people fell in love with it. They fell in love because it didn't compromise, because it refused shortcuts, because every quest, every system, every inconvenient little detail exists for a reason. Kingdom Come was never about power fantasies. It was about patience, about friction, about living in a world that doesn't care if you're comfortable. What Warhorse built wasn't just a bigger sequel, it was a statement. A statement that realism can be engaging, that complexity can be rewarding, that players don't need their hands held, they need to be trusted. From a risky debut that could have ended a studio to a sequel that proved this wasn't luck.
I'd like to thank Dan Vávra, and all of you who made KCD2 possible. Thank you very much. Děkujeme.
And now, standing at the edge of whatever comes next, one thing is clear. Warhorse didn't just survive, they earned their place. So thank you, Warhorse. For the mud, the hunger and the bruises. For the worlds that felt stubbornly, beautifully human. And whatever your next chapter may be, Kingdom Come or something entirely new, I'll be there on day one. And I'm really interested if you will too. Let me know in the comments and like the video and subscribe to the channel. I will see you in the next one.